I have a Gilgo Beach update.
Okay.
Gilgo Beach serial killer suspect, Rex Heuermann, who we talked about at length in a two-parter that came out some point last year. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it because a lot of this is not going to make any sense. But basically, he's been charged with the murders of 2 more women.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first spoke about him last year, he was, of course, charged with the murders of 4 women, Megan Waterman, Melissa Barthélemy, Amber Lynn Costello, and then later on, Maureen Brainard Barnes. Officials in Suffolk County, DA Ray Tierney, has now added charges for the July 2003 dismemberment death of Jessica Taylor and the November 1993 death of Sandra Castillo. Now, those names will sound familiar to anybody who's listened to the episode because they were 2 of the women who were found along that big stretch, which it's always called the Gilgo Beach murders, and we talk about this in the episode. And like some of them were found on Gilgo Beach, but some of them are also found, if you extend the map, in both directions.
Sure.
Investigators said in court records after these charges were made that DNA matches from hairs found on the remains of Jessica Taylor and Sandra Castillo match that of Rex Heuermann. It seems pretty legit. It seems pretty airtight. And if anybody remembers, the reason they didn't want to charge him initially with the murder of Maureen Brainard Barnes is because they found DNA connecting him to all 3 of the other women in the first sort of set of charges, but not on Maureen. And they really, really, really didn't want to risk one weak case being included, because if the defense can poke holes and make it look like, you know, there's reasonable doubt that he didn't kill one of them, then it kind of weakens your whole case. It gets the possibility that he may walk away with nothing. So even though it would obviously be heartbreaking for the families that they wouldn't charge him with, it's more important that he goes away, even if it's for a fewer number of women. So they've been very careful. They've obviously done their due diligence, and they are now saying there's DNA matches. They also said that they recovered violent bondage pornography that was, quote, notably and largely coincided with how the remains of Sandra Castillo, Jessica Taylor, and another woman called Valerie Mack were all discovered. He hasn't been charged with Valerie Mack's murder, though, because they can't find any DNA to confirm it. Now, prosecutors allege, and this is all getting quite graphic, quite early in the morning, that Jessica Taylor was found decapitated and that both of her arms had been cut off. Afterwards, Heuermann allegedly also mutilated Taylor's body to hinder her identification. That's all they say, but I think we can probably take hands, fingers, teeth, face. Now, the only thing they say about Sandra Castillo is that her body was placed in a lewd manner. Like, they're being quite vague about it, so I don't have much more information than that. When we go to trial, Rex Heuermann will be going to trial because he has pleaded not guilty to all of the charges, all 4 from last year and these 2 that have been added. He is, of course, being held without bail. I don't know when this trial is going to be, because it seems like they're more keen, and I'm not saying rightly or wrongly so, to continue to add more charges against him. So trial, we'll just have to wait and see. They will really, really, after all of the fanfare that's been made around Rex Heuermann being caught, if they let him walk away, it will just be the most humiliating and awful thing. So they are really well and truly trying to, dot all the I's and cross all the T's and add as many charges as they can. Now, like I said, not a huge amount of information, but there was a couple of tidbits of information that did come out of the filing papers that were released before this announcement was made. For example, a prosecutor said that they have discovered a planning document on Rex Heuermann's hard drive. If you remember, he's an architect. He had that weird dungeon that everybody kept saying was calling it a dungeon A and saying it was soundproof. It wasn't. It was just a basement conversion that he had done, but it was filled with guns, and they found all sorts of weird stuff like those dolls and those kind of things down there, and found a lot of computers which were filled to the brim with incredibly violent pornography. But they also said now they found a planning document on the hard drive, which was found in the basement, that they say that he used as a methodical blueprint for his killings. Again, it seems quite vague what they're actually saying, but apparently the document included Rex Heuermann's notes after each murder. So basically, when we look at other serial killers, we always say, what was it, that quote? Ted Bundy said it was the first time you're really careful, the 13th time you don't know where the wrench is, because they tend to devolve. They tend to get too comfortable, especially if they're not caught. Rex Heuermann doesn't seem to have been that way. He seems to have been a very, very precise and methodical man. Again, probably something to do with his profession and just the type of person he was. But he was very concerned about leaving behind forensic evidence, and he left himself notes and reminders of, and a checklist of things to do every time he killed, so that he didn't kind of get swept away in the moment and forget to do these things like cleaning himself up, cleaning the bodies, washing the bodies, and also tips on how to improve for next time. I know. Again, when the trial happens, we will come back to it. We'll do a proper episode with all of the updates, everything that happens, everything that comes out of the trial. But until then, I think they're going to keep pretty tight-lipped. I just have one final interesting point to make. Now, if you guys listened to our two-parter on Gilgo Beach last year, you'll know that we talked about how those bodies that were found along that stretch, there were so many of them that the police didn't think they were just attributable to one killer. They thought that it was just a coincidental dumping ground for lots of different types of killers. We go into a lot of depth in that episode. Go check it out if you haven't. So they basically think multiple killers were probably operating out of that area, and it wasn't a wild a thing to say because we know there were other serial killers killing in that area. One of them being a man named John Bittroff. Now, John Bittroff had been associated with a couple of murders of the bodies that were found in that area, and he was actually convicted of the murder of 2. So people call John Bittroff a serial killer. Under new FBI guidance, he would be considered. At the time, he wasn't because it was only 2. But they did long suspect him of having killed Sandra Castillo, who has now been associated with Rex Heuermann via DNA. And what's interesting is John Bittroff was arrested in 2014, and he was later convicted, like I said, of 2 women whose bodies were found in that area and given a 50-year sentence. He's still alive. He's in prison in upstate New York. Now, like I said, police initially thought that he was also linked to Sandra Castillo's murder, but they found DNA associating him with the murders of the 2 women he was convicted of, but they couldn't find his DNA anywhere on Sandra Castillo. He always denied that he had killed Sandra. So they convict him of the 2 to, again, be safe, get the conviction, put him in prison. And now when they reassess Sandra Castillo's remains and the DNA found on her, it looks like John Bittroff wasn't lying that he didn't do it because they are a match for Rex Heuermann. That area is just so muddled and I want to say disgusting, and I don't mean the area, I just mean that. This whole crime, that whole stretch, the number of serial killers, the suspicions the police had, the lack of clarity about anything. But at least now it looks like Sandra Castillo's family will get an answer. And I think one thing that this does show us is that Jessica Taylor and Sandra Castillo were not 2 of the bodies that were found in that very precise area on Gilgo Beach. They were also 1993, one of the bodies. So it really shows that Rex Heuermann's alleged, we should say, reign of terror probably lasts longer than we initially thought. And he was much more geographically dispersed than we initially thought, which just opens the door for all sorts of more horrible possibilities, unfortunately.
I mean, it sounds like they've got a lot to go on.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I think the challenge for them now as prosecutors is, when do you close the door? Like, when do you say, we've got enough, let's just convict him? Say there are 5 more bodies out there that are unattributed to a killer. Do you spend lots more resources of police time, money, DA time, etc., continuously investigating this man for who, if you took to trial now, would go to prison? No doubt about it. Or do you continue to look into it to see if he killed any more of them? I'm not saying those cold cases shouldn't be looked into because there could be somebody else who could still be alive. There's been a lot of pressure on that police department, rightly so, because as we talked about in the episode we did, they did a lot of terrible things. So maybe they've got a point to prove. Even the way they caught him, literally pizza box, bites the pizza, puts it in a box, chucks it in the bin. They were even so lucky that he put it back in the box and threw it in the bin. Because if he just thrown it in the bin.
Yeah.
Because they can prove his fingerprints are on the box. If he did chuck the pizza slice into the bin, it could have been contaminated. Like, there would have been so many harder things for them to prove to get the arrest. But literally puts it back in the box and chucks it in the bin. Eat your crusts. Or don't kill multiple women.